This is going to get people sent to Leavenworth. Let's get after it. I'm James Merritt, Emergency Manager and Career Soldier, and this is Readiness Nation. So we need to have a serious conversation about what seems to be a strategy of inciting mutiny by some opponents of the current administration. This is the kind of thing that's going to end people up in federal prison. So first and foremost, this video is about clarifying the actual applicable laws to my juniors and making sure that they understand their obligations under these laws to keep them out of prison. And for both my juniors and all of the civilians out there that are genuinely scared of some military impropriety occurring, I need to lay out all of the safeguards that we have in place to make sure that the officer corps isn't leading our juniors astray. We then need to discuss what laws those putting out this messaging have most likely broken, and then we need to discuss the ramifications stunts like these have on US national stability. But let me start off by saying that I'm not saying all of this as some good company boy who just always does what he's told. Nor am I a heartless officer trying to march you down the road to perdition. When I was a platoon leader in Afghanistan, I was under the command of a company commander that, given what I know now, I am certain had an antisocial personality disorder. His first deployment was in support of special forces, and I don't know who he was running around with, but somehow he got it into his head that how to be like SF was to lie, cheat, steal, and be reckless with the well-being of his soldiers. So as a brand new officer, I was confronted with both the Milgram test and the Ash conformity test in an active war zone. With my reputation, career, future, and potentially my well-being on one side of the scale, and the standards, values, and regulations of the United States Army and the well-being of my soldiers on the other, I chose to uphold the standard and protect my soldiers. Once things got bad enough, there was an extensive Inspector General investigation into his conduct, and when the dust cleared, he was relieved for cause and sent home from Afghanistan. So I was right to have stood up to him when he was doing all of that. But even being right, there was still a significant price to be paid for bucking the system. If you're not familiar, meritorious Bronze Stars pretty much just became the Army's participation trophy for senior leaders. If you were a senior NCO or officer who deployed to GWAT, you got one by default. But even though the executive protection mission he farmed me out on, ironically to get rid of me, was the highest profile element of that deployment, I only got an ARCOM, and all of my peers got Bronze Stars. Furthermore, I was branded a troublemaker, and my career was so extensively thumbed that I'm a full rank behind where I should be in my career progression. And that's not because I'm a crap officer. I received the highest rating possible from both my rater and senior rater for both years of my company command time. So I'm actually quite good at this whole officer thing. So no, I was just being punished for defying the orthodoxy. So it's critical that you understand, even when you're right, there's still a price to be paid. It's like I keep saying on this channel, this is not a movie, this is not a video game. You are not the main character. No one knows who you are. If you fight the good fight when it's all over, you're not going to be commended for your moral courage and given an award by the president. The screen isn't going to fade to black, and the credits aren't going to roll. Instead, you're going to spend the rest of your life living with the consequences of your actions. That's what makes taking the hard right over the easy wrong so hard. There's always a price you'll have to pay for taking it. It's unfair, but that's life. So I'm telling you as a guy who's been there. If you're ordered to do something that's actually illegal, you of course need to refuse that order. But standing up to authority is not a thing to be trifled with. If you play adult games, you will pay adult prices. But getting to the point, the first thing we need to address is that the underlying premise of don't follow unlawful orders is correct. If you're ordered to do something that's actually illegal, advise your chain of command that's illegal and that you're not going to do it. But when they say saying you were just following orders isn't an excuse, they're hearkening back to the Nuremberg trials where that was given as a defense. So the orders in question there were to commit mass murder against civilians. You're expected to fully understand that murder, especially mass murder, and any other form of atrocity is illegal, and if ordered to do so, not to follow that order. So if you're ever ordered to open fire on unarmed civilians, don't do that. However, when it comes to orders of dubious legality because of issues with the statutory authority of the officer issuing those orders, I'm not aware of any instance in the history of the US military where an enlisted person was held accountable because an officer overstepped their authority. The assumption that good order and conduct in the ranks is predicated on is that commanding officers know what we're doing and are of sound judgment. The organization can't function if everyone's always second-guessing the chain of command. But that then also means unless the order is clearly and obviously illegal, like murdering civilians, enlisted personnel will not be held accountable for officers' mistakes. So you need to be absolutely certain that an order is illegal before you refuse it. But that's why we have rules of engagement briefs anytime you go anywhere in the US military. Even if you do a CTC rotation, which is a brigade-sized war game. They call the tactical portion of this going in the box. And before you go in the box, there's an ROE brief. This is actual legal counsel given by a fully qualified Army lawyer explaining clearly in plain language what you can and cannot do. So everyone needs to pay careful attention to this brief to stay out of trouble. So if you're ever ordered to do something that explicitly violates the ROE, just remind your chain of command that that violates the ROE, so that can't possibly be what they actually meant. 99.99% of the time, the order will be clarified to something that doesn't violate the ROE. But if you're ordered to do something that you think might be unlawful and you're not mid-mission, don't refuse the order, just say that you're confused about the order and need legal clarification. But explicitly say you are not refusing the order and you just need clarification. It's best if you're able to request this legal clarification in writing so that there's a paper trail. If you're correct and there's something legally dubious about the order, legal counsel will issue legal advice to your chain of command and your chain of command will fix the issue. But understand that it's incredibly unlikely that you'll be issued unlawful orders outside of the heat of battle. This is due to the fact that at every level of command where the commander has a staff that works for them, so at the battalion level and above, that commander has an Army lawyer on their staff that works directly for them to make sure that they stay out of legal trouble. And every time we do the analysis to make plans as an Army staff, that lawyer sits in on the process to make sure that we don't include anything unlawful in the plan. So it's really only at the company and platoon levels that they don't have lawyers and could conceivably make legal mistakes. But at that level, in combat, all they really need to worry about is the ROE and not engaging in those obvious war crimes. So it's very unlikely you'll ever be issued unlawful orders. But if you ever are, you should in fact refuse them. However, if you're ever thinking about refusing an order, you need to be absolutely positive that order is in fact unlawful. Because if you're wrong and the order is lawful, you'll be violating Article 92 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, which criminalizes the failure to obey an order or regulation, which carries a maximum penalty of 2 years in prison and a dishonorable discharge. And dishonorable discharges are no joke. They affect your ability to vote, own a gun, get loans, get a civilian job, and bars you from holding public office or gaining any other form of federal employment. So only refuse an order if you are absolutely sure it's illegal, and not because some opportunistic politician told you to, because they don't have your back. They have no ability to have your back. They're not in your chain of command, nor do they have the authority to overturn a court-martial. If you refuse an order and you're wrong, it will seriously screw up your life. And if politicians put you up to it, there's very little they can actually do for you. So never put yourself in the position to be used as a politician's pawn. Which brings me to my next point. Are these politicians and political hopefuls breaking the law by making the public statements they've made? The short answer is that it would appear so. But let's break it down. The first instance in this chain of events is National Guard Captain and Illinois congressional candidate Dylanblaha. In this 47-second clip, it would appear that Blaha has violated multiple articles of the UCMJ and is factually wrong about his assertions.
My name is Captain Dylanblaha, and this message is for all U.S. military service members, especially every general and admiral meeting with Pete Hegseth on Tuesday. I'm a 13-year U.S. Army veteran who served in Afghanistan and wrote war plans while stationed at U.S. Army Europe. This morning, Donald Trump directed Pete Hegseth to deploy the U.S. military to Portland, Oregon. This is the latest illegal attempt to normalize the use of the military in U.S. cities. He authorized the military to use, quote, full force. This is authoritarianism. This is fascism. The U.S. military is not a law enforcement force, and all federalized service members must abide by the Possecomitatus Act. All members of the United States military must disobey illegal orders. I was just following orders is not a valid defense against war crimes. Grow a spine and stand up for your fellow Americans. Otherwise, you are complicit in this fascist takeover. We're running out of time.
First up, even if the order was unlawful, that has nothing to do with fascism. I'm quite certain that Blaha has no idea what fascism actually is. But even if it were fascism, a currently serving officer calling the actions of a sitting president fascism is a violation of Article 88 of the UCMJ. Article 88 bars any officer from using contemptuous language towards elected government officials. Calling the president a fascist is an explicit violation of Article 88 and has legal precedent. In 1967, Second Lieutenant Henry Howe Jr. publicly called President Lyndon Johnson a fascist and was convicted of violating Article 88 at a general court-martial. Furthermore, it explicitly states in Article 88 that the statements being made being factually accurate is not a defense for a violation of Article 88. The point here is that you're not allowed to undermine elected officials as an officer of the military. But even so, what he's saying here is factually inaccurate. The National Guard forces that were deployed to Oregon were deployed under Title 10, federalized status, which does make them subject to possecomitatus, but possecomitatus only prohibits federal military forces from engaging in law enforcement activities. Federal military forces can provide non-law enforcement support to law enforcement agencies. So as long as these forces aren't making arrests or conducting investigations, it's not a violation of possecomitatus. Furthermore, these forces were explicitly deployed to secure federal facilities that were under threat from rioters. Federal military forces can lawfully be deployed to secure federal facilities, property, and personnel anywhere in the world anytime they're under threat. This is a perfectly lawful and, quite frankly, normal federal military activity. Marines, who are only ever in Title 10 status, are currently securing the White House and every U.S. embassy everywhere on Earth right now. So this kind of thing is not only legal, it's actually quite common. As such, Blaha's assertion that this is an unlawful order is false, which means he's inciting service members to refuse a lawful order, which is a violation of Article 82 of the UCMJ. This is punishable by 10 years in prison and will be a recurring theme throughout the rest of this presentation. So Blaha could legitimately face some serious charges over his actions. But what about the 6 sitting congresspeople who pulled a similar stunt?
I'm Senator Alyssa Slotkin.
Senator Mark Kelly.
Representative Chris DeLuzio.
Maggie Goodlander.
Representative Chrissy Houlihan.
Congressman Jason Crow. I was a captain in the United States Navy.
Former CIA officer.
Former Navy.
Former paratrooper and Army Ranger.
Former intelligence officer.
Former Air Force.
We want to speak directly to members of the military
And the intelligence community.
who take risks each day
To keep Americans safe.
We know you are under enormous stress and pressure right now. Americans trust their military.
But that trust is at risk.
This administration is pitting our uniformed military
And intelligence community professionals.
Against American citizens.
like us. You all swore an oath.
to protect and defend this Constitution.
And right now, the threats to our Constitution aren't just coming from abroad, but from right here at home.
Our laws are clear. You can refuse illegal orders.
You can refuse illegal orders.
You must refuse illegal orders.
No one has to carry out orders that violate the law or our Constitution.
We know this is hard and that it's a difficult time to be a public servant.
But whether you're serving in the CIA,
The Army,
Our Navy,
the Air Force,
your vigilance is critical
and know that we have your back.
because now, more than ever,
The American people need you. We need you to stand up for our laws.
our Constitution,
and who we are as Americans. Don't give up.
don't give up.
Don't give up.
Don't give up the ship.
When confronted about this, they tried to say they were just telling troops not to follow illegal orders. So what's wrong with that? Well, the problem is we do a significant amount of rule of law training in the military at every level of officer professional development. In officer candidacy, we talk about the My Lai massacre and hold up warrant officer Hugh Thompson Jr., who landed his helicopter between the attacking US soldiers and the civilians being massacred, physically blocking the assault, as the exemplar of moral courage. Furthermore, there are whole sections of the Captain's Career Course and the Intermediate Leader Education course, the Army schools for captains and majors respectively, that cover the law of land warfare. So we don't need a publicity stunt from congresspeople on the subject. We especially don't need a stunt that doesn't actually effectively inform service members of their duties, obligations, and rights in this matter, nor clearly outlines what illegal orders are referring to, or even what makes an order illegal in the general sense. So at best, this was completely unhelpful, most likely confusing to junior service members, and didn't need to be done. But at worst, it's likely illegal. So the first problem is that they framed the duly elected president and his administration as a domestic threat to the Constitution. This is most likely a violation of Article 88 as well. Furthermore, they end their stunt with the phrase, "Don't give up the ship," which were the dying words of Captain James Lawrence in a naval battle during the War of 1812. Lawrence was referring to the British in that dying order. But who are these congresspeople telling you don't give up the ship to? Well, remember, they started by saying that the administration was a domestic threat to the Constitution. So it would appear they're saying don't give up the ship to the duly elected Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the United States. The Navy has a word for it when subordinates don't let the lawful captain command the ship. They call it mutiny, and it's a violation of Article 94 of the UCMJ, and it's punishable by death. This is also the article and penalty for sedition. Furthermore, soliciting mutiny is also a violation of Article 82, and again is punishable by 10 years in prison. But right about now you're probably saying, hold on, these Congress people are all veterans, meaning they're no longer in the military, so they're not subject to the UCMJ. And for 5 of the 6 of them, you would be correct. But markkelly is actually retired. When an officer is retired, we're put in the retired reserve. Retired officers actually stay service-connected for life, and as such, can be recalled to duty if the circumstances necessitate it. This is theoretically so that we have the necessary senior officers available to rapidly and drastically build out our military for a World War III scenario. But if a retired officer engages in an egregious violation of the UCMJ, he can actually be recalled to duty to face court-martial. As for the rest of them, the applicable legal charge would be 18 U.S. Code 2387, which is more or less the same thing as Article 82 of the UCMJ and carries the same penalty of 10 years in prison, but applies to all civilians. So legitimately, every one of them could be facing at least 10 years in prison for their little stunt. And the last entity we need to discuss in this section is a shadowy organization calling itself notwhatyousignedupfor.org. This organization has put up billboards directing people to a website that instructs them to contact them using various encrypted means. And whereas legally this is not evidence of guilt, there are several entirely above-board organizations that give legitimate legal advice to service members. And none of these organizations encourage people to only contact them via encrypted means. Because there's nothing illegal, actionable, or untoward about service members contacting legitimate legal professionals for legal counsel. So common sense would tell you that if these guys are encouraging you to contact them via encrypted means, it's because they're going to encourage you to commit mutiny or sedition, which is 10 years in prison for them and the death penalty for you. So for the love of God, don't get tangled up with shadowy, seditious organizations. There is no way any good could possibly come from it. If you have legal questions, there are several completely above-board organizations you can reach out to for legal advice. The final thing we need to discuss are the stability ramifications of all of this. Now, I first need to point out to every Democrat in America that you absolutely do not want to set the precedent that service members get to decide for themselves which leaders are legitimate and which orders they're going to follow. I'll remind you that roughly 2/3 of the US military is to the right of the political spectrum. And when you get to the combat arms, the people who actually do the fighting, it's more like 90%. As I consistently point out, I'm a moderate centrist on the 8-factor political test. And I can count on one hand the number of dudes I met when I was in the infantry who were to the left of me politically speaking. When I was on battalion staff for the first time, I worked for a commander who didn't like me at all because he was a staunch conservative Catholic and I was far too liberal for his liking. So the point here is that if you make it the standard that service members get to decide who's legitimate and what orders they're going to follow, no Democrat president will actually be the commander-in-chief ever again. So this one can only come back to bite you. But going back to the concepts I discussed in my video, 3 reasons why we're headed for a civil war and 2 reasons we aren't, Blaha could be an example of a young, unsavvy politician who just doesn't know where the line is and crossed it by mistake. Or he could be a zealot, we just don't know enough about him yet. But as for the other 6, they're all clearly just new, unsavvy, and way out of their depth. Each of the Congress people in that video have less than 6 years in Congress. They're all still very much learning how the game is played. And whereas they all thought this was going to win them a ton of clout in the reality TV show of US politics, they clearly had no idea where the line actually was. So this ends up being one of those dangerous examples I told you to watch out for, where legal action towards an elected official is necessitated. So whereas something does need to be done about all this to clearly signal this kind of nonsense will not be tolerated, putting these 7 in prison for the next decade is most likely an unwise escalation. Expulsion from Congress is probably far more prudent. So in conclusion, if you're a service member, never refuse an order unless you're absolutely positive that it's actually illegal. Because the consequences for being wrong are catastrophic, and no one is actually going to be there to bail you out. And if you're a scared civilian, understand that we actually do a ton of rule of law training in the officer corps. We have legal counsel on standby to make sure we do everything in accordance with the law, and no one makes it to be a senior officer if they play fast and loose with the law. And whoever you are, please don't get taken in by these crazy stunts. They're factually dubious, and they just spread fear and division. And at the end of the day, the actual enemy we're fighting in the homeland is fear and division. But that's going to be it for me. So if you found this information useful, give me the old controlled pair on the like and subscribe buttons. If you found this information useful enough that you want to buy me a beer about it, there's a link to my Patreon and Subscribe Star in the description. So until next time, this is James Merritt for Readiness Nation, reminding you to always be the master of your fate and the captain of your soul.